My name is Mark, and I've always thought of myself as a loyal husband, a dedicated family man, and someone who could trust the people closest to me without question. Laura and I have been married for 20 years, and while life hasn't always been easy, I thought we had built a bond strong enough to weather anything. We've had our ups and downs, but who hasn't after 2 decades together? I believed we were solid, built on love and trust. I was wrong. It started subtly, as these things often do. Laura and Peter, my sister Alice's husband, had been working together at the same insurance company for years. It wasn't something I ever thought twice about. They were colleagues, and Peter had always seemed like a decent guy. I trusted him. I trusted Laura. And I trusted Alice, who had been my closest ally growing up. She was my sister, after all. What could be more sacred than family? Looking back, there were signs. Little things I brushed off as insignificant because I never wanted to believe the worst. Laura started coming home later than usual, citing work deadlines or last-minute client meetings. Peter's name began coming up in conversations more often, but it was always casual. "Peter and I closed that big deal today," she'd say, or, "Peter's such a lifesaver. He helped me fix the copier when it jammed." I didn't think much of it. I even teased her once, saying, "Sounds like Peter's your office knight in shining armor." She laughed, and I laughed with her, completely oblivious to the reality brewing beneath the surface. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. I was at home, tidying up while Laura was supposedly running errands. Alice stopped by unexpectedly. She looked tense, her hands gripping the steering wheel even after she'd parked in the driveway. When she finally stepped inside, I noticed she wasn't her usual composed self. "I need to talk to you, Mark," she said, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" I asked, concerned. Alice was never one to dramatize. She hesitated for a moment, then blurted it out. "I think something's going on between Laura and Peter." The words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, the laugh, the reassurance that she was joking. But her face remained solemn, her eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Was it anger? Sadness? Betrayal? "What are you talking about?" I finally managed to say, my voice quieter than I intended. Alice took a deep breath. "I found some messages on Peter's phone," she admitted. "They weren't explicit, but they were too familiar, too personal. He's been acting strange lately, working late, taking random calls and stepping outside to answer them. I confronted him, but he brushed me off, said I was overreacting." My heart sank. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there had to be some other explanation. But a sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. "Do you have any proof?" I asked, though I already felt the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Alice shook her head. "Not concrete proof, but I know Peter, and I know when he's hiding something. And I thought you should know. If there's something going on, we need to figure it out." After Alice left, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. My mind raced as I replayed conversations, interactions, and moments that had seemed normal at the time, but now felt like glaring red flags. Laura's late nights, her growing fondness for Peter, the way she always seemed to have her phone glued to her hand when she thought I wasn't looking. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that the woman I had spent 20 years building a life with could betray me like this. But I also couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach, the voice in the back of my mind telling me that something was very, very wrong. That evening, when Laura came home, she seemed her usual self, cheerful, talkative, and completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew I needed more. If I was going to accuse her of something this serious, I had to be absolutely certain. So I stayed quiet, acting as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was already beginning to plan my next move. I wasn't going to let this slide, not without finding out the truth. The betrayal was just beginning, and I had no idea how deep it would go. The first time I saw the message, I thought it was a mistake or some cruel prank. It arrived late at night, a notification lighting up my phone while I was watching TV in the living room. Laura had already gone to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The sender was someone I didn't recognize. Unknown _4321. At first, I considered ignoring it. But something about the timing, about the strange knot in my stomach that had been tightening since Alice's visit, made me open it. The message was short, almost clinical. "You need to see this. I thought you should know." Attached was a video file. My thumb hovered over the play button, my heart pounding. I hesitated, wondering if I was overreacting. But curiosity, or maybe instinct, got the better of me. I tapped play. The video opened with a dimly lit office, one that I immediately recognized as Laura's workplace. The timestamp in the corner showed it was recorded just a few nights ago, during one of the late meetings Laura had mentioned. The camera angle was low, almost like it had been hidden on a desk or shelf. At first, it seemed harmless, just two people talking. But as the seconds ticked by, it became clear this wasn't a normal conversation. Laura and Peter were standing close, too close. Her laugh was nervous, her hand lingering on his arm longer than necessary. Then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a quick peck or an accidental brush. It was deliberate, intimate, and unmistakable. My stomach churned as I watched, a mix of rage and heartbreak coursing through me. The video didn't stop there. It shifted to another angle, this time from the corner of the room, showing the two of them moving toward a couch. I couldn't bring myself to watch the entire thing. I paused the video, my hands shaking, my chest tight. The sheer betrayal of it all was overwhelming. But I couldn't stop myself. After a moment, I pressed play again, skipping ahead. The third angle was the most damning, capturing everything in excruciating detail. There was no denying it now. Laura was cheating on me, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the screen, replaying the video in my mind even after I'd closed it. Who had sent this? Why now? And how had they managed to get such damning evidence? The questions swirled in my mind, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep this to myself. The next morning, I called Alice. Her voice was groggy when she picked up, but she perked up immediately when I said, "We need to talk. It's about Laura and Peter." We met at a small cafe on the other side of town, far from anyone who might know us. I brought my laptop with me, unsure how to explain everything without showing her the video. When I finally told her about the message, about what I had seen, her expression shifted from confusion to shock to devastation. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I opened the laptop and played the video. Alice's hand flew to her mouth as she watched, her eyes brimming with tears. "I can't believe this," she said, her voice trembling. "I knew something was off, but I didn't think it was this." Her reaction only confirmed what I already suspected. She had been dealing with her own suspicions. The signs had been there for both of us, but we had ignored them, trusting the people we loved. Now that trust was shattered. As we sat there, piecing together the timeline of Laura and Peter's betrayal, it became clear that this had been going on for months, maybe longer. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the growing distance in both of our marriages. It all made sense now. "What are we going to do?" Alice asked, her voice breaking. I didn't have an answer yet. The anger and hurt were too fresh, the betrayal too raw. But one thing was certain. Neither of us could let this go. Laura and Peter had not only betrayed their spouses, they had betrayed our families, tearing apart relationships that had taken decades to build. "I need time to think," I said finally. "But we're not letting them get away with this." Alice nodded, wiping her tears. "We'll handle this together. They won't see it coming." In that moment, I realized that while I had lost trust in Laura, I still had my sister by my side. And together, we were going to make sure that Peter and Laura faced the full weight of their actions. The morning after my conversation with Alice, I knew it was time to take the next step. The betrayal we had uncovered wasn't just a personal attack. It was a complete dismantling of everything we had built in our marriages. I wasn't going to let Laura walk away without consequences, and neither was Alice. Together, we decided to bring in someone we both trusted, Bill, a longtime family friend and an expert in divorce law. Bill had been part of our lives for years, always the calm and analytical presence in any situation. When we explained what had happened, he didn't look surprised, just deeply disappointed. Infidelity cases are messy, he said, leaning back in his chair. But you're both fortunate you planned ahead. He was right. Years ago, both Alice and I had signed prenuptial agreements with our spouses. At the time, it had felt almost unnecessary, a formality we'd hoped would never be relevant. But now, those documents were our saving grace. Marking the terms of betrayal had been a mutual decision when we married. Neither of us wanted to worry about what might happen if the worst occurred. For me, the agreement stated that if Laura committed infidelity, she would forfeit the majority of our shared assets, walking away with only 15%. No alimony, no additional claims, nothing. Alice's agreement with Peter was almost identical, ensuring he'd leave with minimal support if he strayed. Bill reviewed both agreements carefully, nodding as he flipped through the pages. "These are solid," he said. "Very clear, very enforceable. The video evidence you have is going to be critical, especially if either of them tries to contest the terms." Over the next week, Alice and I worked closely with Bill to prepare our cases. It was a surreal and emotionally exhausting process, going through years of financial records, listing assets, and detailing every instance of betrayal. The video evidence became the cornerstone of both cases, but we also began gathering additional proof. Text messages, emails, and witness statements from coworkers who had noticed suspicious behavior. For Alice, the process was particularly painful. "I thought Peter loved me," she said one evening as we worked late at Bill's office. "How could he throw it all away for this?" I didn't have an answer. The same question had been haunting me since I'd seen that first message. Laura and I had shared 20 years of our lives, and now it felt like every moment had been tainted by her lies. Bill was relentless in his preparation, guiding us through every possible scenario. "Don't be surprised if they try to deny or minimize what happened," he warned. "People like this often try to shift the blame when they're caught. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and let the evidence speak for itself." While the legal preparations were underway, I started making practical changes in my life. I moved into the guest room, avoiding any unnecessary interaction with Laura. She was still oblivious to what I knew, carrying on as if everything was normal. Every smile, every casual comment felt like a dagger to my chest, but I held my ground, waiting for the right moment to confront her. Alice, on the other hand, had already begun emotionally distancing herself from Peter. She hadn't told him yet, but her decision was made. "I'm not giving him the satisfaction of a confrontation," she told me. "He's not worth it." As the days passed, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The betrayal still stung, but the act of taking control, of preparing for the inevitable, gave me a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my future, and my peace of mind. By the time Bill finalized the paperwork, Alice and I were ready. We had the evidence, the legal framework, and the resolve to see this through. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be painless, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was in control. "The next step," Bill said as he handed us the finalized documents, "is confronting them. Once they know what's coming, they'll have a choice. Cooperate or fight. Either way, you're prepared." I nodded, glancing at Alice. "It's time," I said. She gave me a determined look. "Let's do this." The confrontation was looming, but I was ready. Laura and Peter had betrayed us in the worst way imaginable, and now they were going to face the consequences of their actions. The next phase of the divorce preparation wasn't just emotional, it was financial. Bill had made it clear that protecting our assets was crucial, especially since we knew Laura and Peter wouldn't hesitate to exploit any loophole they could find. With that in mind, both Alice and I took immediate action to safeguard what was ours. I transferred $250,000 from our shared accounts into a personal account under my name, one that Laura couldn't access. It was well within my rights under the terms of the prenuptial agreement, but I still felt a pang of bitterness as I moved the funds. This wasn't how I had imagined our financial partnership would end, but after what she had done, trust was no longer part of the equation. Alice did the same with her share, moving $200,000 into a separate account. "If Peter thinks he's getting a dime of this, he's in for a surprise," she said. her voice laced with determination. We both knew that while our agreements were ironclad, taking preemptive steps would ensure there were no surprises when the dust settled. What we didn't know at the time was that Laura and Peter were already one step ahead, or so they thought. While Alice and I were carefully managing our assets, Laura and Peter had been scheming in secret, moving large sums of money into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The total was staggering: $500,000, siphoned away from both of our families under the guise of business investments. Their arrogance would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. They must have thought they were invincible, that no one would discover their little nest egg hidden overseas. But fate has a way of unraveling even the most carefully laid plans. The discovery came completely by accident, and the culprits were none other than our kids. Jaden, my 17-year-old son, had always been tech-savvy, the kind of kid who could hack his way into just about anything if he put his mind to it. His sister Sarah, 16, was equally sharp, though her talents leaned more toward observation and piecing together clues. It started when Jaden borrowed Laura's laptop to work on a school project. She had left it on the kitchen counter, open but idle, while she ran upstairs. Jaden, curious by nature, couldn't resist poking around when he noticed a string of unusual emails open in her inbox. What he found stopped him in his tracks. Detailed correspondence between Laura and Peter discussing offshore accounts, wire transfers, and the exact amount they had hidden. Jaden immediately called Sarah over, and the two of them pieced together the details. The accounts were registered under aliases, with coded references to their respective shares. The emails were filled with arrogant comments about how Mark and Alice will never know, and this money will secure our future. Sarah, always the responsible one, took screenshots of everything and saved them onto a flash drive. "We need to tell Dad," she said firmly. At the same time, over at Alice's house, her twins, Travis and Molly, stumbled upon similar evidence. Peter, careless as always, had left a folder of printed documents on his desk, statements from the Cayman accounts, complete with account numbers and transaction histories. Molly, curious about what her dad was working on, opened the folder and immediately realized what it was. She showed Travis, and the two of them decided to bring the documents to Alice. When Jaden and Sarah approached me later that evening, I could see the unease on their faces. "Dad, there's something you need to see," Jaden said, handing me the flash drive. As I opened the files on my computer and began reading, a wave of anger and disbelief washed over me. Laura and Peter hadn't just betrayed us emotionally. They were actively stealing from us, taking what didn't belong to them to fund their escape plan. Alice called me not long after, her voice shaking as she explained what Travis and Molly had found. "They've been planning this for months, Mark," she said. "They thought they could get away with it. Well, they're about to find out just how wrong they are," I replied, my voice cold with determination. Armed with the evidence, Alice and I immediately brought it to Bill. He was impressed by the thoroughness of what the kids had uncovered. "This is a game changer," he said. "Not only does it strengthen your divorce cases, but it also opens the door for potential legal action. Hiding assets like this is not only unethical, it's illegal." We decided to move quickly, filing motions to freeze all known accounts and subpoena records from the offshore banks. Laura and Peter had underestimated us, and now their carefully constructed web of deceit was beginning to unravel. As I sat down with Jaden and Sarah later that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in them. "You two did the right thing," I said. "This isn't going to be easy, but we're going to get through it. Together." They nodded, their expressions a mix of resolve and relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. Laura and Peter thought they could take everything from us, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The moment the kids got involved, everything escalated in ways I never could have anticipated. Jaden, Sarah, Travis, and Molly took matters into their own hands, fueled by a mix of anger, betrayal, and an almost unsettling level of ingenuity. While Alice and I were focused on the legal and financial aspects of the divorce, the kids launched their own campaign to expose Laura and Peter's lies and secure what was rightfully theirs. It started with Jaden, who had always had a knack for technology. He pitched the idea to Sarah and then looped in Travis and Molly. "If they think they can play dirty, we'll play smarter," Jaden told them. Together, they devised a plan that was both bold and risky. Their first step was installing hidden cameras in the apartment Laura and Peter were renting for their rendezvous. Jaden, with his technical expertise, procured cameras small enough to fit into inconspicuous places, behind picture frames, in vent grates, and even disguised as a clock on the bedside table. Travis helped with the physical installation, sneaking into the apartment while Peter and Laura were out, using the spare key Peter carelessly kept in his car. Over the next few weeks, the cameras captured everything. Laura and Peter's meetings, their conversations, and their casual admissions of guilt were all recorded. The footage was damning, showing not just the depth of their betrayal but also their schemes to hide money and manipulate Alice and me. Meanwhile, Sarah and Molly took on the task of accessing Laura's phone. With Jaden's guidance, they bypassed her security measures and gained access to her messages, call logs, and even audio recordings. What they found was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. The text messages between Laura and Peter were explicit and arrogant, filled with references to their affair and plans to leave Alice and me high and dry. There were also detailed discussions about the offshore accounts, complete with account numbers and instructions for accessing the funds. But the most shocking discovery came in the form of audio recordings. Laura had a habit of using her phone to dictate notes and reminders, and some of these recordings revealed her true thoughts about the situation. In one particularly gut-wrenching clip, she laughed about how Mark will never see this coming, and how Peter and I deserve this money more than they do. The kids didn't stop there. With the account details in hand, they decided to take back what Laura and Peter had stolen. Jaden and Travis, working together, accessed the offshore accounts through a secure VPN. They transferred the $500,000 into educational trust funds set up for the four of them. The trusts were legally protected, ensuring that neither Laura nor Peter could touch the money. The move was bold, bordering on reckless, but it was also brilliant. By the time Laura and Peter realized what had happened, the money was already locked away, inaccessible without the children's consent. When Jaden and Sarah told me what they had done, I was initially stunned. "You did what?" I asked, struggling to process the audacity of their actions. "We didn't want them to get away with it, Dad," Jaden said, his voice steady. "That money belongs to our family. It's for us, not for them to run off and live some fantasy life." I sat there for a moment, torn between pride and concern. On one hand, their actions had given us a significant advantage in the legal battle. On the other, I worried about the risks they had taken. "You should have come to me first," I said finally. "But thank you. You've done something I didn't think was possible." Alice's reaction was much the same when Travis and Molly revealed their part in the plan. She was horrified at first but quickly realized the brilliance of their strategy. "You've saved us," she told them. "I'm so proud of you both." With the evidence from the cameras, the messages, and the recovered funds, Alice and I were ready to move forward. Bill was astonished when we presented everything to him. "This is the kind of evidence most people only dream of getting in cases like this," he said. "They're done. There's no way they can recover from this." The kids had turned the tide of the battle in our favor, exposing Laura and Peter's deceit and securing the money they had tried to steal. It was a bittersweet victory, one that came at the cost of their innocence but also showed their strength and determination. As I looked at my children, I realized that while Laura had betrayed me, she hadn't broken our family. If anything, her actions had brought us closer together, forging a bond that was stronger than ever. And now, with the truth on our side, we were ready to face whatever came next. The trial was everything we expected. Intense, emotionally charged, and filled with revelations that left no room for doubt about Laura and Peter's betrayal. The courtroom was packed with tension as the evidence we had meticulously gathered was laid bare for everyone to see. Bill, our lawyer, was a force to be reckoned with. He opened by presenting the video footage from the hidden cameras, which showed Laura and Peter meeting in their rented apartment. The judge watched in silence, the damning images leaving no room for ambiguity. Every glance, every touch, every whispered conversation was on display. Laura and Peter sat stiffly at their table, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Next came the audio recordings, extracted from Laura's phone. Bill played clips where Laura openly mocked me, laughing about how I would never suspect her, and others where Peter discussed their plans to hide money in offshore accounts. The recordings painted a clear picture of their deceit and the lengths they had gone to conceal it. Finally, Bill presented the text messages, including explicit discussions about their affair and their plans to leave Alice and me with nothing. The combination of video, audio, and written evidence was overwhelming, leaving Laura and Peter's attorney scrambling to mitigate the damage. During cross-examination, both Laura and Peter tried to downplay their actions. Laura insisted that the affair had no bearing on her ability to be a good mother, while Peter claimed the offshore accounts were legitimate business dealings. Neither of them seemed to grasp the gravity of their betrayal or the impact it had on everyone involved. Bill dismantled their arguments with precision. "Mrs. Carter," he said to Laura, "are you suggesting that deceiving your husband, hiding assets, and mocking his trust in you are signs of a healthy co-parenting relationship?" Laura stammered, her face flushing red. I never meant for it to go this far. "And yet it did," Bill replied calmly, turning to the judge. "The evidence clearly shows a pattern of manipulation, dishonesty, and complete disregard for the well-being of their families." Peter's defense didn't fare any better. When questioned about the offshore accounts, he became defensive, claiming they were set up for financial security. Bill didn't let up, pointing out the explicit discussions in the texts about siphoning money from their joint accounts. The judge was firm and decisive in their ruling. After reviewing the evidence, they concluded that Laura and Peter's actions had violated the terms of both prenuptial agreements and caused irreparable harm to their families. Alice and I were awarded 85% of the joint property, ensuring that Laura and Peter walked away with only a fraction of what they had tried to secure for themselves. This included the house, which I would retain, and a significant portion of our shared savings. Additionally, the judge granted Alice and me full custody of the children. The evidence of Laura and Peter's deceit, combined with their attempts to hide assets, demonstrated a lack of responsibility and moral character that made them unfit for joint custody. Finally, the court ordered financial restitution. Laura was required to pay $1,500 per month in child support, while Peter, due to his higher income at the time of the betrayal, was ordered to pay $2,500 per month. The judge made it clear that their actions had consequences, and this was part of their responsibility to the families they had abandoned. As the gavel fell, marking the end of the trial, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Justice had been served, but it came at a cost. The betrayal and the fight to reclaim our lives had left scars that wouldn't heal overnight. Alice and I walked out of the courtroom side by side, a united front against the chaos Laura and Peter had tried to unleash. Our children were waiting for us, their faces filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "It's over," I told them. "We can move on now." Jaden nodded, his expression resolute. They got what they deserved. I couldn't argue with that. Laura and Peter had been exposed, their lies laid bare for the world to see. Now, it was time for us to pick up the pieces and start building a new future, one free of deceit and betrayal, and filled with the love and trust we still had as a family. After the trial, the fallout for Laura and Peter went far beyond the courtroom. Their betrayal had not only destroyed their families but also left their professional lives in shambles. Once the dust settled, it became clear that they would have to pay the price for their actions in every aspect of their lives. Shortly after the verdict, the insurance company where Laura and Peter worked launched an internal investigation. The company had received anonymous tips, likely from someone who had caught wind of the courtroom drama, alleging misuse of corporate funds. The evidence was damning. Financial records showed that Laura and Peter had used company credit cards to help cover the rent for their secret apartment. The company wasted no time. Both Laura and Peter were terminated for gross misconduct. The official statement cited violations of company policy and misuse of resources, leaving no ambiguity about why they were let go. Their colleagues, many of whom had been oblivious to the affair, were stunned. Laura and Peter had always presented themselves as polished professionals, but now their reputations were irreparably damaged. With no jobs and limited financial resources, Laura and Peter were forced to make drastic changes to their lives. They sold what little they had left after the court's ruling, including their cars and other luxury items, and moved to a small, rundown house in Florida. The irony of their situation wasn't lost on anyone. Two people who had schemed for wealth and freedom now reduced to living modestly and scraping by. Their new jobs were a far cry from the high-paying corporate positions they had enjoyed before. Both found work at a small logistics company, handling mundane tasks far beneath their previous roles. The stress of their new reality took its toll, and their once passionate affair quickly turned into a relationship of mutual resentment. The charm and excitement that had drawn them together were replaced by bitterness and blame. The most painful consequence for Laura and Peter, however, was their fractured relationship with their children. The court had awarded full custody to Alice and me, and it was clear from the beginning that the kids had no interest in maintaining close ties with their unfaithful parents. Jaden, Sarah, Travis, and Molly had seen firsthand the damage Laura and Peter had caused, and they had little sympathy for their attempts at reconciliation. At first, Laura and Peter tried to stay in touch, sending sporadic messages and attempting video calls. But the kids were firm in their boundaries, responding politely but distantly, if at all. Over time, the contact dwindled, and Laura and Peter seemed to accept that their relationship with their children would never be the same. Alice and I, on the other hand, focused on rebuilding a sense of stability and trust for our children. Our home became a place of healing, where honesty and open communication were valued above all else. The kids thrived under this new environment, finding solace in the knowledge that they were surrounded by people who truly cared about them. While Laura and Peter had been banished to the periphery of their children's lives, Alice and I worked hard to ensure that the future was bright for our family. We made it clear to the kids that while the pain of the past would always be a part of our story, it didn't have to define us. As for Laura and Peter, they now lived a life far removed from the one they had envisioned during their affair. Their choices had led them down a path of isolation and regret, and they were left with little more than each other. Occasionally, I heard updates about them through mutual acquaintances, small snippets about their struggles or attempts to rebuild. But their lives no longer concerned me. They had made their bed, and now they were lying in it. Their betrayal had cost them everything: family, careers, and respect, and there was no going back. As for Alice and me, we had moved on, determined to build a future filled with love, loyalty, and the trust that Laura and Peter had so recklessly destroyed.